Chapter 21 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 21. How Agostino Pisano risked his head. Even the squire's table at the Abbey of St. Andrew's at Bordeaux was on a very sumptuous scale while the prince held his court there. Here first, after the meagre fare of Beaulieu and the stinted board of the Lady Loring, Alleyne learned the lengths to which luxury and refinement might be pushed. Roasted peacocks, with the feathers all carefully replaced, so that the bird lay upon the dish even as it had strutted in life. Boars' heads, with the tusks gilded and the mouth lined with silver foil. Jellies in the shape of the 12 apostles, and a great pasty which formed an exact model of the king's new castle at Windsor. These were a few of the strange dishes which faced him. An archer had brought him a change of clothes from the cog, and he had already, with the elasticity of youth, shaken off the troubles and fatigues of the morning. A page from the inner banqueting hall had come with word that their master intended to drink wine at the lodgings of the Lord Chandos that night, and that he desired his squires to sleep at the hotel of the Half Moon on the Rue des Apôtres. Thither then they both set out in the twilight, after the long course of juggling tricks and glee singing with which the principal meal was concluded. A thin rain was falling as the two youths, with their cloaks over their heads, made their way on foot through the streets of the old town, leaving their horses in the royal stables. An occasional oil lamp at the corner of a street, or in the portico of some wealthy burgher, threw a faint glimmer over the shining cobblestones and the varied motley crowd who, in spite of the weather, ebbed and flowed along every highway. In those scattered circles of dim radiance might be seen the whole busy panorama of life in a wealthy and martial city. Here passed the round faced burgher, swollen with prosperity, his sweeping dark clothed gaberdine, flat velvet cap, broad leather belt, and dangling pouch, all speaking of comfort and of wealth. Behind him his serving wench, her blue wimple over her head, and one hand thrust forth to bear the lantern which threw a golden bar of light across her master's path. Behind them a group of swaggering, half drunken Yorkshire dalesmen, speaking a dialect which their own Southland countrymen could scarce comprehend, their jerkins marked with a pelican, which showed that they had come over in the train of the North Country Stapletons. The burgher glanced back at their fierce faces and quickened his step, while the girl pulled her wimple closer round her, for there was a meaning in their wild eyes as they stared at the purse and the maiden, which men of all tongues could understand. Then came archers of the guard, shrill voiced women of the camp, English pages with their fair skins and blue wondering eyes, dark robed friars, lounging men at arms, swarthy, loud tongued Gascon serving men, seamen from the river, rude peasants of the Medoc, and becloaked and befeathered squires of the court, all jostling and pushing in an ever changing, many colored stream, while English, French, Welsh, Basque, and the varied dialects of Gascony and Guienne filled the air with their babble. From time to time the throng would be burst asunder, and a lady's horse litter would trot past towards the abbey, or there would come a knot of torch bearing archers walking in front of Gascon baron or English knight as he sought his lodgings after the palace revels. Clatter of hoofs, clinking of weapons, shouts from the drunken brawlers, and high laughter of women, they all rose up like the mist from a marsh out of the crowded streets of the dim lit city. One couple out of the moving throng especially engaged the attention of the two young squires, the more so that they were going in their own direction and immediately in front of them. They consisted of a man and a girl, the former very tall with rounded shoulders and a limp of one foot, and a large flat object covered with dark cloth under his arm. His companion was young and straight, with a quick elastic step and graceful bearing, though so swathed in a black mantle that little could be seen of her face save a flash of dark eyes and a curve of raven hair. The tall man leaned heavily upon her to take the weight off his tender foot, while he held his burden betwixt himself and the wall, cuddling it jealously to his side, and thrusting forward his young companion to act as a buttress whenever the pressure of the crowd threatened to bear him away. The evident anxiety of the man, the appearance of his attendant, and the joint care with which they defended their concealed possession, excited the interest of the two young Englishmen who walked within hand touch of them. "Courage, child!" they heard the tall man exclaim in strange hybrid French. "If we can win another 60 paces we are safe." "Hold it safe, father," the other answered in the same soft mincing dialect. "We have no cause for fear." "Verily, they are heathens and barbarians," cried the man. "Mad, howling, drunken barbarians. 40 more paces, Tita mia, and I swear to the holy Eloy, patron of all learned craftsmen, that I will never set foot over my door again until the whole swarm are safely hived in their camp of Dax, or wherever else they curse with their presence. 20 more paces, my treasure. Ah, my God, how they push and brawl! Get in their way, Tita mia. Put your little elbow bravely out. Set your shoulders squarely against them, girl. Why should you give way to these mad islanders? Ah, cospetto, we are ruined and destroyed." The crowd had thickened in front, so that the lame man and the girl had come to a stand. Several half drunken English archers, attracted, as the squires had been, by their singular appearance, were facing towards them and peering at them through the dim light. "By the three kings!" cried one, "here is an old dotard shrew to have so goodly a crutch. Use the leg that God hath given you, man, and do not bear so heavily upon the wench." "20 devils fly away with him!" shouted another. "What, how, man! Are brave archers to go maidless, while an old man uses one as a walking staff?" "Come with me, my honey bird," cried a third, plucking at the girl's mantle. "Nay, with me, my heart's desire," said the first. "By St. George! our life is short, and we should be merry while we may. May I never see Chester Bridge again if she is not right winsome lass." "What hath the old toad under his arm?" cried one of the others. "He hugs it to him as the devil hugged the pardoner." "Let us see, old bag of bones, let us see what it is that you have under your arm." They crowded in upon him, while he, ignorant of their language, could but clutch the girl with one hand and the parcel with the other, looking wildly about in search of help. "Nay, lads, nay!" cried Ford, pushing back the nearest archer. "This is but scurvy conduct. Keep your hands off, or it will be the worse for you." "Keep your tongue still, or it will be the worse for you," shouted the most drunken of the archers. "Who are you to spoil sport?" "A raw squire, new landed," said another. "By St. Thomas of Kent, we are at the beck of our master, but we are not to be ordered by every babe whose mother hath sent him as far as Aquitaine." "Oh, gentlemen," cried the girl in broken French, "for dear Christ's sake stand by us, and do not let these terrible men do us an injury." "Have no fears, lady," Alleyne answered. "We shall see that all is well with you." "Take your hand from the girl's wrist, you north country rogue." "Hold to her, what?" said a great black bearded man at arms, whose steel breastplate glimmered in the dusk. "Keep your hands from your bodkins, you two, for that was my trade before you were born, and by God's soul I will drive a handful of steel through you if you move a finger." "Thank God!" said Alleyne suddenly, as he spied in the lamplight a shock of blazing red hair which fringed a steel cap high above the heads of the crowd. "Here is John, and Aylward too. Help us, comrades, for there is wrong being done to this maid and to the old man." "Hola, mon petit!" said the old bowman, pushing his way through the crowd, with the huge forester at his heels. "What is all this, then? By the twang of string, I think that you will have some work upon your hands if you are to right all the wrongs that you may see upon this side of the water. It is not to be thought that a troop of bowmen, with the wine buzzing in their ears, will be as soft spoken as so many young clerks in an orchard. When you have been a year with the Company you will think less of such matters. But what is amiss here? The provost marshal with his archers is coming this way, and some of you may find yourselves in the stretch neck if you take not heed." "Why, it is old Sam Aylward of the White Company!" shouted the man at arms. "Why, Samkin, what hath come upon thee? I can call to mind the day when you were as roaring a blade as ever called himself a free companion. By my soul, from Limoges to Navarre, who was there who would kiss a wench or cut a throat as readily as Bowman Aylward of Hawkwood's company?" "Like enough, Peter," said Aylward; "but by my hilt, I may not have changed so much. But it was ever a fair loose and a clear mark with me. The wench must be willing, or the man must be standing up against me, else by these 10 finger bones either were safe enough from me." A glance at Aylward's resolute face and at the huge shoulders of Hordle John had convinced the archers that there was little to be got by violence. The girl and the old man began to shuffle on in the crowd without their tormentors venturing to stop them. Ford and Alleyne followed slowly behind them, but Aylward caught the latter by the shoulder. "By my hilt, camarade," said he, "I hear that you have done great things at the abbey to day, but I pray you to have a care, for it was I who brought you into the company, and it would be a black day for me if aught were to befall you." "Nay, Aylward, I will have a care." "Thrust not forward into danger too much, mon petit. In a little time your wrist will be stronger and your cut more shrewd. There will be some of us at the Rose de Guienne to night, which is 2 doors from the Hotel of the Half Moon, so if you would drain a cup with a few simple archers you would be right welcome." Alleyne promised to be there if his duties would allow, and then, slipping through the crowd, he rejoined Ford, who was standing in talk with the 2 strangers, who had now reached their own doorstep. "Brave young signor!" cried the tall man, throwing his arms round Alleyne. "How can we thank you enough for taking our parts against those horrible drunken barbarians? What should we have done without you? My Tita would have been dragged away, and my head would have been shriven into 1,000 fragments." "Nay, I scarce think they would have mishandled you so," said Alleyne in surprise. "Ho, ho!" cried he with a high crowing laugh. "It is not the head upon my shoulders that I think of. Cospetto, no! It is the head under my arm which you have preserved." "Perhaps the signori would deign to come under our roof, father," said the maiden. "If we bide here, who knows that some fresh tumult may not break out?" "Well said, Tita, well said, my girl. I pray you, sirs, to honor my unworthy roof so far. A light, Giacomo! There are 5 steps up. Now 2 more. So here we are at last in safety. Corpo di Baccio! I would not have given 10 maravedi for my head when those children of the devil were pushing us against the wall. Tita mia, you have been a brave girl, and it was better that you should be pulled and pushed than my head should be broken." "Yes, indeed, father," said she earnestly. "But those English! Ah! Take a Goth, a Hun, and a Vandal, mix them together and add a Barbary rover, then take this creature and make him drunk, and you have an Englishman. My God, were ever such people upon the earth? What place is free from them? I hear that they swarm in Italy, even as they swarm here. Everywhere you will find them, except in heaven." "Dear father," cried Tita, still supporting the angry old man as he limped up the curved oaken stair, "you must not forget that these good signori who have preserved us are also English." "Ah, yes. My pardon, sirs. Come into my rooms here. There are some who might find some pleasure in these paintings, but I learn that the art of war is the only art which is held in honor in your island." The low roofed, oak panelled room into which he conducted them was brilliantly lit by 4 scented oil lamps. Against the walls, upon the table, on the floor, and in every part of the chamber were great sheets of glass painted in the most brilliant colors. Ford and Edricson gazed around them in amazement, for never had they seen such magnificent works of art. "You like them, then?" the lame artist cried in answer to the look of pleasure and of surprise on their faces. "There are then some of you who have a taste for such trifling. I could not have believed it," exclaimed Alleyne. "What color! What outlines! See to this martyrdom of the holy Stephen, Ford. Could you not yourself pick up one of these stones which lie to the hand of the wicked murderers? And see this stag, Alleyne, with the cross betwixt its horns. By my faith, I have never seen a better one in the forest of Beer. And the green of this grass, how bright and clear! Why, all the painting that I have seen is but child's play beside this. This worthy gentleman must be one of those great painters of whom I have oft heard brother Bartholomew speak in the old days at Beaulieu." The dark, mobile face of the artist shone with pleasure at the unaffected delight of the 2 young Englishmen. His daughter, had thrown off her mantle and disclosed a face of the finest and most delicate Italian beauty, which soon drew Ford's eyes from the pictures in front of him. Alleyne, however, continued with little cries of admiration and of wonderment to turn from the walls to the table, and yet again to the walls. "What think you of this, young sir?" asked the painter, tearing off the cloth which concealed the flat object which he had borne beneath his arm. It was a leaf shaped sheet of glass, bearing upon it a face with a halo round it, so delicately outlined and of so perfect a tint that it might have been indeed a human face which gazed with sad and thoughtful eyes upon the young squire. He clapped his hands with the thrill of joy which true art will ever give to a true artist. "It is great!" he cried. "It is wonderful! But I marvel, sir, that you should have risked a work of such beauty and value by bearing it at night through so unruly a crowd." "I have indeed been rash," said the artist. "Some wine, Tita, from the Florence flask. Had it not been for you, I tremble to think of what might have come of it. See to the skin tint. It is not to be replaced, for paint as you will, it is not once in 100 times that it is not either burned too brown in the furnace, or else the color will not hold, and you get but a sickly white. There you can see the very veins and the throb of the blood. Yes, diavolo, if it had been broken, my heart would have been broken too. It is for the choir window in the church of St. Remy, and we had gone, my little helper and I, to see if it was indeed the size for the stonework. Night had fallen ere we finished, and what could we do save carry it home as best we might? But you, young sir, you speak as if you too knew something of the art." "So little that I scarce dare speak of it in your presence," Alleyne answered. "I have been cloister bred, and it was no very great matter to handle the brush better than my brother novices." "There are pigments, brush, and paper," said the old artist. "I do not give you glass, for that is another matter, and takes much skill in the mixing of colors. Now I pray you to show me a touch of your art. Oh, I thank you, Tita. The Venetian glasses, cara mia, and fill them to the brim. A seat, signor." While Ford, in his English French, was conversing with Tita in her Italian French, the old man was carefully examining his precious head to see that no scratch had been left upon its surface. When he glanced up again, Alleyne had, with a few bold strokes of the brush, tinted in a woman's face and neck upon the white sheet in front of him. "Diavolo!" exclaimed the artist, standing with his head on one side. "You have power. Yes, cospetto, you have power. It is the face of an angel." "It is the face of the Lady Maude Loring," cried Ford, even more astonished. "Why, on my faith, it is not unlike her," said Alleyne, in some confusion. "Ah, a portrait! So much the better. Young man, I am Agostino Pisano, the son of Andrea Pisano, and I say again that you have power. Further, I say that if you will stay with me I will teach you all the secrets of the glass stainer's mystery, the pigments and their thickening, which will fuse into the glass and which will not, the furnace and the glazing, every trick and method you shall know." "I would be right glad to study under such a master," said Alleyne, "but I am sworn to follow my lord whilst this war lasts." "War, war!" cried the old Italian. "Ever this talk of war! And the men that you hold to be great, what are they? Have I not heard their names? Soldiers, butchers, destroyers. Ah, per baccio, we have men in Italy who are in very truth great. You pull down, you despoil, but they build up, they restore. And if you could but see my own dear Pisa, the Duomo, the cloisters of Camposanto, the high campanile, with the mellow throb of her bells upon the warm Italian air. Those are the works of great men, and I have seen them with my own eyes, these very eyes which look upon you. I have seen Andrea Occagna, Taddeo Gaddi, Giottino, Stefano, Simone Memmi, men whose very colors I am not worthy to mix. And I have seen the aged Giotto, and he in turn was pupil to Cimabue, before whom there was no art in Italy. For the Greeks were brought to paint the chapel of the Gondi in Florence. Ah, signori, there are the real great men, whose names will be held in honor when your soldiers are shown to have been the enemies of humankind." "Faith, sir," said Ford, There is something to say for the soldiers also, for unless they be defended, how are all these gentlemen whom you have mentioned to preserve the pictures which they have painted?" "And all these?" said Alleyne. "Have you indeed done them all? And where are they to go?" "Yes, signor, they are all from my hand. Some are, as you see, upon one sheet, and some are in many pieces which may fasten together. There are some who do but paint upon the glass, and then by placing another sheet of glass upon the top and fastening it they keep the air from their painting. Yet I hold that the true craft of my art lies as much in the furnace as in the brush. See this rose window, which is from the model of the church of the Holy Trinity at Vendôme, and this other, the Finding of the Grail, which is for the apse of the Abbey church. Time was when none but my countrymen could do these things, but there is Clement of Chartres and others in France who are very worthy workmen. But there is that ever shrieking brazen tongue which will not let us forget for one short hour that it is the arm of the savage and not the hand of the master which rules over the world." A stern, clear bugle call had sounded close at hand to summon some following together for the night. "It is a sign to us as well," said Ford. "I would fain stay here forever amid all these beautiful things," staring hard at the blushing Tita as he spoke. "But we must be back at our lord's hostel ere he reach it." Amid renewed thanks, and with promises to come again, the two squires bade their leave of the old Italian glass stainer and his daughter. The streets were clearer now, and the rain had stopped, so they made their way quickly from the Rue du Roi, in which their new friends dwelt, to the Rue des Apotres, where the hostel of the Half Moon was situated. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 22. How the bowmen held wassail at the Rose de Guienne. "Mon Dieu, Alleyne, saw you ever so lovely a face?" cried Ford as they hurried along together. "So pure, so peaceful, and so beautiful." "In sooth, yes, and the hue of the skin the most perfect that ever I saw. Marked you also how the hair curled round the brow? It was wonder fine." "Those eyes too," cried Ford. "How clear and how tender, simple and yet so full of thought." "If there was a weakness it was in the chin," said Alleyne. "Nay, I saw none. It was well curved, it is true, most daintily so. And yet what then, Alleyne? Wouldst find flaw in the sun? Well, bethink you, Ford, would not more power and expression have been put into the face by a long and noble beard?" "Holy Virgin!" cried Ford. "The man is mad. A beard on the face of little Tita!" "Tita? Who spoke of Tita?" "Who spoke of aught else? It was the picture of St. Remy, man, of which I have been discoursing." "You are indeed," cried Ford, laughing, "a Goth, Hun, and Vandal, with all the other hard names which the old man called us. How could you think so much of a smear of pigments when there was such a picture painted by the good God himself in the very room with you? But who is this?" "If it please you, sirs," said an archer, running across to them, "Aylward and others would be right glad to see you. They are within here. He bade me to say to you that the Lord Loring will not need your service to night, as he sleeps with the Lord Chandos." "By my faith," said Ford, "we do not need a guide to lead us to their presence." As he spoke there came a roar of singing from the tavern upon the right, with shouts of laughter and stamping of feet. Passing under a low door and down a stone flagged passage, they found themselves in a long narrow hall, lit up by a pair of blazing torches, one at either end. Trusses of straw had been thrown down along the walls, and reclining on them were some 20 or 30 archers, all of the Company, their steel caps and jacks thrown off, their tunics open and their great limbs sprawling upon the clay floor. At every man's elbow stood his leathern black jack of beer, while at the further end a hogshead, with its end knocked in, promised an abundant supply for the future. Behind the hogshead, on a half circle of kegs, boxes, and rude settles, sat Aylward, John, Black Simon, and 3 or 4 other leading men of the archers, together with Goodwin Hawtayne, the master shipman, who had left his yellow cog in the river to have a last rouse with his friends of the company. Ford and Alleyne took their seats between Aylward and Black Simon, without their entrance checking in any degree the hubbub which was going on.
"Ale, mes camarades," cried the bowman, "or shall it be wine? Nay, but you must have one or the other. Here, Jacques, thou limb of the devil, bring a bottrine of the oldest vernage, and see that you do not shake it. Hast heard the news?"
"Nay," cried both the squires.
"That we are to have a brave tourney."
"A tourney?"
"Aye, lads, for the Captal de Buch hath sworn that he will find 5 knights from this side of the water who will ride over any 5 Englishmen who ever threw leg over saddle. And Chandos hath taken up the challenge, and the prince hath promised a golden vase for the man who carries himself best, and all the court is in a buzz over it."
"Why should the knights have all the sport?" growled Hordle John. "Could they not have set up 5 archers for the honor of Aquitaine and of Gascony?"
"Or 5 men at arms," said Black Simon. "But who are the English knights?" asked Hawtayne.
"There are 341 in the town," said Aylward, "and I hear that 340 cartels and defiances have already been sent in, the only one missing being Sir John Ravensholm, who is in his bed with the sweating sickness and cannot set foot to ground."
"I have heard it from one of the archers of the guard," cried a bowman from among the straw. "I hear that the prince wished to break a lance, but that Chandos would not hear of it, for the game is likely to be a rough one." "Then there is Chandos." "Nay, the prince would not permit it. He is to be marshal of the lists, with Sir William Felton and the Duke d'Armagnac. The English will be Lord Audley, Sir Thomas Percy, Sir Thomas Wake, Sir William Beauchamp, and our very own good lord and leader."
"Hurrah for him, and God be with him!" cried several.
"It is honor to draw string in his service."
"So you may well say," said Aylward. "But by my 10 finger bones, if you march behind the pennon of the 5 Roses, you are like to see all that a good bowman would wish to see. Ha! Yes, mes garçons, you laugh, but by my hilt you may not laugh when you find yourselves where he will take you, for you can never tell what strange vow he may not have sworn to. I see that he has a patch over his eye, even as he had at Poitiers. There will come bloodshed of that patch, or I am the more mistaken."
"How chanced it at Poitiers, good Master Aylward?" asked one of the young archers, leaning upon his elbows with his eyes fixed respectfully on the old bowman's rugged face.
"Aye, Aylward, tell us of it," cried Hordle John.
"Here is to old Samkin Aylward!" shouted several at the further end of the room, waving their black jacks in the air.
"Ask him," said Aylward modestly, nodding towards Black Simon. "He saw more than I did, and yet by the holy nails there was not very much that I did not see either."
"Ah, yes," said Simon, shaking his head. "It was a great day. I never hope to see such another. There were some fine archers who drew their last shaft that day. We shall never see better men, Aylward."
"By my hilt, no. There was little Robbie Withstaff, and Andrew Salblaster, and Wat Alspaye, who broke the neck of the German. Mon Dieu, what men they were! Take them how you would, at long butts or short, hoyles, rounds, or rovers, better bowmen never twirled a shaft over their thumb nails."
"But the fight, Aylward, the fight!" cried several impatiently.
"Let me fill my jack first, boys, for it is a thirsty tale. Yes, it was at the first fall of leaf that the prince set forth, and he passed through Auvergne and Berry and Anjou and Touraine. In Auvergne the maids are kind, but the wines are sour. In Berry it is the women that are sour, but the wines are rich. Anjou, however, is a very good land for bowmen, for wine and women are all that heart could wish. In Touraine I got nothing save a broken pate, but at Vierzon I had a great good fortune, for I had a golden pyx from the minster, for which I afterwards got 9 Genoan janes from the goldsmith in the Rue Montolive. From thence we went to Bourges, where I had a tunic of flame colored silk, and a very fine pair of shoes with tassels of silk and drops of silver." "From a stall, Aylward?" asked one of the young archers. "Nay, from a man's feet, lad. I had reason to think he might not need them again, seeing that a 30-inch shaft had feathered in his back."
"And what then, Aylward?"
"On we went, coz, some 6,000 of us, until we came to Issoudun, and there again a very great thing befell."
"A battle, Aylward?"
"Nay, nay, a greater thing than that. There is little to be gained out of a battle unless one have the fortune to win a ransom. At Issoudun I and 3 Welshmen came upon a house which all others had passed, and we had the profit of it to ourselves. For myself, I had a fine feather bed, a thing which you will not see in a long day's journey in England. You have seen it, Alleyne, and you, John. You will bear me out that it is a noble bed. We put it on a sutler's mule and bore it after the army. It was on my mind that I would lay it by until I came to start house of mine own, and I have it now in a very safe place near Lyndhurst."
"And what then, master bowman?" asked Hawtayne. "By St. Christopher, it is indeed a fair and goodly life which you have chosen, for you gather up the spoil as a warsash man gathers lobsters, without grace or favor from any man." "You are right, master shipman," said another of the older archers. "It is an old bowyer's rede that the second feather of a fenny goose is better than the pinion of a tame one. Oh, draw on, old lad, for I have come between you and the clout."
"On we went then," said Aylward, after a long pull at his black jack. "There were some 6,000 of us, with the prince and his knights, and the feather bed upon a sutler's mule in the centre. We made great havoc in Touraine until we came into Romorantin, where I chanced upon a gold chain and 2 bracelets of jasper, which were stolen from me the same day by a black eyed wench from the Ardennes. Mon Dieu! There are some folk who have no fear of doomsday in them, and no sign of grace in their souls, for ever clutching and clawing at another man's chattels."
"But the battle, Aylward, the battle!" cried several, amid a burst of laughter.
"I come to it, my young war pups. Well, then, the King of France had followed us with 50,000 men, and he made great haste to catch us. But when he had us he scarce knew what to do with us, for we were so drawn up among hedges and vineyards that they could not come nigh us, save by one lane. On both sides were archers, men at arms, and knights behind, and in the centre the baggage, with my feather bed upon a sutler's mule. 300 chosen knights came straight for it, and indeed they were very brave men, but such a drift of arrows met them that few came back. Then came the Germans, and they also fought very bravely, so that 1 or 2 broke through the archers and came as far as the feather bed, but all to no purpose. Then out rides our own little hothead with a patch over his eye, and my Lord Audley with his 4 Cheshire squires, and a few others of like kidney, and after them went the prince and Chandos, and then the whole throng of us, with axe and sword, for we had shot away our arrows. Ma foi, it was a foolish thing, for we came forth from the hedges, and there was naught to guard the baggage had they ridden round behind us. But all went well with us, and the king was taken, and little Robbie Withstaff and I fell in with a wain with 12 firkins of wine for the king's own table. And by my hilt, if you ask me what happened after that, I cannot answer you, nor can little Robbie Withstaff either."
"And next day?"
"Oh, by my faith, we did not tarry long, but we hied back to Bordeaux, where we came in safety with the King of France and also the feather bed. I sold my spoil, my garçon, for as many gold pieces as I could hold in my hufkin, and for 7 days I lit 12 wax candles upon the altar of St. Andrew. For if you forget the blessed when things are well with you, they are very likely to forget you when you have need of them. I have a score of 119 pounds of wax against the holy Andrew, and as he was a very just man, I doubt not that I shall have full weight and measure when I have most need of it."
"Tell me, Master Aylward," cried a young fresh faced archer at the further end of the room, "what was this great battle about?"
"Why, you jack fool, what would it be about save who should wear the crown of France?"
"I thought that mayhap it might be as to who should have this feather bed of thine."
"If I come down to you, Silas, I may lay my belt across your shoulders," Aylward answered, amid a general shout of laughter. "But it is time young chickens went to roost, when they dare cackle against their elders. It is late, Simon."
"Nay, let us have another song. Here is Arnold of Sowley will troll as good a stave as any man in the company." "Nay, we have one here who is second to none," said Hawtayne, laying his hand upon big John's shoulder. "I have heard him on the cog with a voice like the wave on a shore. I pray you, friend, to give us the Bells of Milton, or, if you will, the Franklin's Maid." Hordle John drew the back of his hand across his mouth, fixed his eyes upon the corner of the ceiling, and bellowed forth, in a voice which made the torches flicker, the Southland ballad for which he had been asked. "The Franklin he hath gone to Rome, The Franklin's maid she bides at home, But she is cold and coy and staid, And who may win the Franklin's maid? There came a knight of high renown In bassinet and sickler town, On bended knee full long he prayed He might not win the Franklin's maid. There came a squire so debonair, His dress was rich, his words were fair, He sweetly sang, he deftly played, He could not win the Franklin's maid. There came a mercer wonder fine, With velvet cap and gaberdine, For all his ships, for all his trade, He could not buy the Franklin's maid. There came an archer bold and true, With bracer guard and stave of yew, His purse was light, his jerkin frayed, Haro, alas, the Franklin's maid! Oh, some have laughed and some have cried, And some have scoured the country side, But off they ride through wood and glade, The bowman and the Franklin's maid. A roar of delight from his audience, with stamping of feet and beating of blackjacks against the ground, showed how thoroughly the song was to their taste, while John modestly retired into a quart pot, which he drained in 4 giant gulps.
"I sang that ditty in Hordle ale house ere I ever thought to be an archer myself," quoth he.
"Fill up your stoups," cried Black Simon, thrusting his own goblet into the open hogshead in front of him. "Here is a last cup to the White Company and every brave boy who walks behind the roses of Loring." "To the wood, the flax, and the gander's wing," said an old gray headed archer to the right. "To a gentle loose, and the King of Spain for a mark at 14 score," cried another. "To a bloody war," shouted a fourth. "Many to go and few to come." "With the most gold to the best steel," added a fifth.
"And a last cup to the maids of our heart," cried Aylward. "A steady hand and a true eye, boys, so let 2 quarts be a bowman's portion." With shout and jest and snatch of song they streamed from the room, and all was peaceful once more in the Rose de Guienne. Chapter 23. Of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 23. How England held the lists at Bordeaux. So used were the good burghers of Bordeaux to martial display and knightly sport, that an ordinary joust or tournament was an everyday matter with them. The fame and brilliancy of the prince's court had drawn the knights errant and pursuivants of arms from every part of Europe. In the long lists by the Garonne, on the landward side of the northern gate, there had been many a strange combat, when the Teutonic knight, fresh from the conquest of the Prussian heathen, ran a course against the knight of Calatrava, hardened by continual struggle against the Moors, or cavaliers from Portugal broke a lance with Scandinavian warriors from the further shore of the great northern ocean. Here fluttered many an outland pennon, bearing symbol and blazonry from the banks of the Danube, the wilds of Lithuania, and the mountain strongholds of Hungary. For chivalry was of no clime and of no race, nor was any land so wild that the fame and the name of the prince had not sounded through it from border to border. Great, however, was the excitement through town and district
when it was learned that on the third Wednesday in Advent there would be held a passage at arms in which 5 knights of England would hold the lists against all comers. The great concourse of noblemen and famous soldiers, the national character of the contest, and the fact that this was the last trial of arms before what promised to be an arduous and bloody war, all united to make the event one of the most notable and brilliant that Bordeaux had ever seen. On the eve of the contest the peasants flocked in from the whole district of the Medoc, and the fields beyond the walls were whitened with the tents of those who could find no warmer lodging. From the distant camp of Dax, too, and from Blaye, Bourges, Libourne, Saint Emilion, Castillon, Saint Macaire, Cardillac, Rion, and all the cluster of flourishing towns which looked upon Bordeaux as their mother, there thronged an unceasing stream of horsemen and of footmen, all converging upon the great city. By the morning of the day on which the courses were to be run, not less than 80,000 people had assembled round the lists and along the low grassy ridge which looks down upon the scene of the encounter. It was, as may well be imagined, no easy matter among so many noted cavaliers to choose out 5 on either side who should have precedence over their fellows. A score of secondary combats had nearly arisen from the rivalries and bad blood created by the selection, and it was only the influence of the prince and the efforts of the older barons which kept the peace among so many eager and fiery soldiers. Not till the day before the courses were the shields finally hung out for the inspection of the ladies and the heralds, so that all men might know the names of the champions, and have the opportunity to prefer any charge against them should there be stain upon them which should disqualify them from taking part in so noble and honourable a ceremony. Sir Hugh Calverley and Sir Robert Knolles had not yet returned from their raid into the marches of the Navarre, so that the English party were deprived of 2 of their most famous lances. Yet there remained so many good names that Chandos and Felton, to whom the selection had been referred, had many an earnest consultation, in which every feat of arms and failure or success of each candidate was weighed and balanced against the rival claims of his companions. Lord Audley of Cheshire, the hero of Poitiers, and Loring of Hampshire, who was held to be the second lance in the army, were easily fixed upon. Then, of the younger men, Sir Thomas Percy of Northumberland, Sir Thomas Wake of Yorkshire, and Sir William Beauchamp of Gloucestershire were finally selected to uphold the honour of England. On the other side were the veteran Captal de Buch and the brawny Olivier de Clisson, with the free companion Sir Perdugas d'Albret, the valiant Lord of Mucident, and Sigismond von Altenstadt of the Teutonic order. The older soldiers among the English shook their heads as they looked upon the escutcheons of these famous warriors, for they were all men who had spent their lives upon the saddle, and bravery and strength can avail little against experience and wisdom of war. "By my faith, Sir John," said the prince, as he rode through the winding streets on his way to the list, "I should have been glad to have splintered a lance to day. You have seen me hold a spear since I had strength to lift one, and should know best whether I do not merit a place among this honourable company." "There is no better seat and no truer lance, sire," said Chandos; "but if I may say so without fear of offence, it were not fitting that you should join in this debate." "And why, Sir John?" "Because, sire, it is not for you to take part with Gascons against English, or with English against Gascons, seeing that you are lord of both. We are not too well loved by the Gascons now, and it is but the golden link of your princely coronet which holds us together. If that be snapped, I know not what would follow." "Snapped, Sir John!" cried the prince, with an angry sparkle in his dark eyes. "What manner of talk is this? You speak as though the allegiance of our people were a thing which might be thrown off or on like a falcon's jessel." "With a sorry hack one uses whip and spur, sire," said Chandos; "but with a horse of blood and spirit a good cavalier is gentle and soothing, coaxing rather than forcing. These folk are strange people, and you must hold their love even as you have it now, for you will get from their kindness what all the pennons in your army could not wring from them." "You are over grave to day, John," the prince answered. "We may keep such questions for our council chamber. But how now, my brothers of Spain and of Majorca, what think you of this challenge?" "I look to see some handsome jousting," said Don Pedro, who rode with the King of Majorca upon the right of the prince, while Chandos was on the left. By St. James of Compostella, but these burghers would bear some taxing. See to the broadcloth and velvet that the rogues bear upon their backs. By my troth, if they were my subjects they would be glad enough to wear falding and leather ere I had done with them. But mayhap it is best to let the wool grow long ere you clip it." "It is our pride," the prince answered coldly, "that we rule over freemen and not slaves." "Every man to his own humor," said Pedro carelessly. "Carajo! there is a sweet face at yonder window. Don Fernando, I pray you mark the house, and to have the maid brought to us at the abbey." "Nay, brother, nay!" cried the prince impatiently. "I have had occasion to tell you more than once that things are not ordered in this way in Aquitaine." "Thousand pardons, dear friend," the Spaniard answered quickly, for a flush of anger had sprung to the dark cheek of the English prince. "You make my exile so like a home that I forget that at times I am not in very truth back in Castile. Every land hath indeed its ways and manners, but I promise you, Edward, that when you are my guest in Toledo or Madrid you shall not yearn in vain for any commoner's daughter on whom you may deign to cast your eye." "Your talk, sire," said the prince still more coldly, "is not such as I love to hear from your lips. I have no taste for such amours as you speak of, and I have sworn that my name shall be coupled with that of no woman save ever my dear wife." "Ever the mirror of true chivalry!" exclaimed Pedro, while James of Majorca, frightened at the stern countenance of their all powerful protector, plucked hard at the mantle of his brother exile. "Have a care, cousin," he whispered. "For the sake of the Virgin, have a care, for you have angered him." "Pshaw! I fear not," the other answered in the same low tone. "If I miss one stoop I will strike him on the next. Mark me else. Fair cousin," he continued, turning to the prince, "these be rare men at arms and lusty bowmen. I would be hard indeed to match them." "They have journeyed far, sire, but they have never yet found their match." "Nor ever will, I doubt not. I feel myself to be back upon my throne when I look at them. But tell me, dear coz, what shall we do next when we have driven this bastard Henry from the kingdom which he hath filched?" "We shall then compel the King of Aragon to place our good friend and brother James of Majorca upon his throne." "Noble and generous prince!" cried the little monarch. "That done," said King Pedro, glancing out of the corners of his eyes at the young conqueror, "we shall unite the forces of England, of Aquitaine, of Spain, and of Majorca. It would be shame to us if we did not do some great deed with such forces ready to our hand." "You say truly, brother," cried the prince, his eyes kindling at the thought. "Methinks that we could not do anything more pleasing to Our Lady than to drive the heathen Moors out of the country." "I am with you, Edward, as true as hilt to blade. But, by St. James, we shall not let these Moors mock at us from over the sea. We must take ship and thrust them from Africa." "By heaven, yes!" cried the prince. "And it is the dream of my heart that our English pennons shall wave upon the Mount of Olives, and the lilies and lions float over the holy city." "And why not, dear coz? Your bowmen have cleared a path to Paris, and why not to Jerusalem? Once there your arms might rest." "Nay, there is more to be done," cried the prince, carried away by the ambitious dream. "There is still the city of Constantine to be taken, and war to be waged against the Soldan of Damascus. And beyond him, again, there is tribute to be levied from the Cham of Tartary and from the kingdom of Cathay. Ha, John, what say you? Can we not go as far eastward as Richard of the Lion Heart?" "Old Sir John will bide at home, sire," said the rugged soldier. "By my soul, as long as I am seneschal of Aquitaine I will find enough to do in guarding the marches which you have entrusted to me. It would be a blithe day for the King of France when he heard that the seas lay between him and us." "By my soul, John," said the prince, "I have never known you turn laggard before." "The babbling hound, sire, is not always the first at the mort," the old knight answered. "Nay, my true heart, I have tried you often not to know. But, by my soul, I have not seen so dense a throng since the day that we brought King John down Cheapside." It was indeed an enormous crowd which covered the whole vast plain, from the line of vineyards to the river bank. From the northern gate the prince and his companions looked down at a dark sea of heads, brightened here and there by the colored hoods of the women, or by the sparkling headpieces of archers and men at arms. In the centre of this vast assemblage The lists seemed but a narrow strip of green marked out with banners and streamers, while a gleam of white, with a flutter of pennons at either end, showed where the marquees were pitched, which served as the dressing rooms of the combatants. A path had been staked off from the city gates to the stands which had been erected for the court and the nobility. Down this, amid the shouts of the enormous multitude, the prince cantered with his two attendant kings, his high officers of state, and his long train of lords and ladies, courtiers, councillors, and soldiers, with toss of plume and flash of jewel, sheen of silk and glint of gold, as rich and gallant a show as heart could wish. The head of the cavalcade had reached the lists ere the rear had come clear of the city gate, for the fairest and the bravest had assembled from all the broad lands which are watered by the Dordogne and the Garonne. Here rode dark browed cavaliers from the sunny south, fiery soldiers from Gascony, graceful courtiers from Limousin or Saint-Georges, and gallant young Englishmen from beyond the seas. Here, too, were the beautiful brunettes of the Gironde, with eyes which outflashed their jewels, while beside them rode their blonde sisters of England, clear cut and aquiline, swathed in swansdown and ermine, for the air was biting though the sun was bright. Slowly the long and glittering train wound into the lists, until every horse had been tethered by the varlets in waiting, and every lord and lady seated in the long stands which stretched, rich in tapestry and velvet and blazoned arms, on either side of the centre of the arena. The holders of the lists occupied the end which was nearest to the city gate. There, in front of their respective pavilions, flew the martlets of Audley, the roses of Loring, the scarlet bars of Wake, the lion of the Percies, and the silver wings of the Beauchamp, each supported by a squire clad in hanging green stuff to represent so many tritons, and bearing a huge conch shell in their left hands. Behind the tents the great war horses, armed at all points, champed and reared, while their masters sat at the doors of their pavilions with their helmets upon their knees, chatting as to the order of the day's doings. The English archers and men at arms had mustered at that end of the lists, but the vast majority of the spectators were in favour of the attacking party, for the English had declined in popularity ever since the bitter dispute as to the disposal of the royal captive after the battle of Poitiers. Hence the applause was by no means general when the herald at arms proclaimed, after a flourish of trumpets, the names and styles of the knights who were prepared, for the honor of their country and for the love of their ladies, to hold the field against all who might do them the favor to run a course with them. On the other hand, a deafening burst of cheering greeted the rival herald, who, advancing from the other end of the lists, rolled forth the well known titles of the 5 famous warriors who had accepted the defiance. "Faith, John," said the prince, "it sounds as though you were right. Ha, my grace D'Armagnac, it seems that our friends on this side will not grieve if our English champions lose the day." "It may be so, sire," the Gascon nobleman answered. "I have little doubt that in Smithfield or at Windsor an English crowd would favor their own countrymen." "By my faith, that is easily seen," said the prince, laughing, "for a few score English archers at yonder end are bellowing as though they would outshout the mighty multitude. I fear that they will have little to shout over this tourney, for my gold vase has small prospect of crossing the water. What are the conditions, John?" "They are to tilt singly not less than 3 courses, sire, and the victory to rest with that party which shall have won the greater number of courses, each pair continuing till one or the other hath the vantage. He who carries himself best of the victors hath the prize. He who is judged best of the other party hath a jewelled clasp. Shall I order that the nakers sound, sire?" The prince nodded, and the trumpets rang out, while the champions rode forth one after the other, each meeting his opponent in the centre of the lists. Sir William Beauchamp went down before the practised lance of the Captal de Buch. Sir Thomas Percy won the vantage over the Lord of Mucident, and the Lord Audley struck Sir Perducas d'Albret from the saddle. The burly de Clisson, however, restored the hopes of the attackers by beating to the ground Sir Thomas Wake of Yorkshire. So far there was little to choose betwixt challengers and challenged. "By James of Santiago!" cried Don Pedro with a tinge of color upon his pale cheeks, "win who will, this has been a most notable contest. "Who comes next for England, John?" asked the prince, in a voice which quivered with excitement.
"Sir Nigel Loring of Hampshire, sire."
"Ha! He is a man of good courage and skilled in the use of all weapons."
"He is indeed, sire, but his eyes, like my own, are the worse for wars. Yet he can tilt or play his part at hand strokes as merrily as ever. It was he, sire, who won the golden crown which Queen Philippa, your royal mother, gave to be jousted for by all the knights of England after the harrying of Calais. I have heard that at Twynham Castle there is a buffet which groans beneath the weight of his prizes."
"I pray that my vase may join them," said the prince. "But here is the cavalier of Germany, and, by my soul, he looks like a man of great valor and hardiness. Let them run their full 3 courses, for the issue is over great to hang upon one."
As the prince spoke, amid a loud flourish of trumpets and the shouting of the Gascon party, the last of the assailants rode gallantly into the lists. He was a man of great size, clad in black armor, without blazonry or ornament of any kind, for all worldly display was forbidden by the rules of the military brotherhood to which he belonged. No plume or nobloy fluttered from his plain tilting salade, and even his lance was devoid of the customary banderole. A white mantle fluttered behind him, upon the left side of which was marked the broad black cross picked out with silver, which was the well known badge of the Teutonic order. Mounted upon a horse as large, as black, and as forbidding as himself, he cantered slowly forward, with none of those prancings and gambades with which a cavalier was accustomed to show his command over his charger. Gravely and sternly he inclined his head to the prince, and took his place at the further end of the arena. He had scarce done so before Sir Nigel rode out from the holders' enclosure, and, galloping at full speed down the lists, drew his charger up before the prince's stand with a jerk which threw it back upon its haunches. With white armor, blazoned shield, and plume of ostrich feathers from his helmet, he carried himself in so jaunty and joyous a fashion, with tossing pennon and curveting charger, that a shout of applause ran the full circle of the arena. With the air of a man who hastes to a joyous festival, he waved his lance in salute, and, reining the pawing horse round without permitting its forefeet to touch the ground, he hastened back to his station. A great hush fell over the huge multitude as the 2 last champions faced each other. A double issue seemed to rest upon their contest, for their personal fame was at stake as well as their party's honor. Both were famous warriors, but as their exploits had been performed in widely sundered countries, they had never before been able to cross lances. A course between such men would have been enough in itself to cause the keenest interest, apart from its being the crisis which would decide who should be the victors of the day. For a moment they waited, the German sombre and collected, Sir Nigel quivering in every fibre with eagerness and fiery resolution. Then, amid a long drawn breath from the spectators, the glove fell from the marshal's hand, and the 2 steel clad horsemen met like a thunderclap in front of the royal stand. The German, though he reeled for an instant before the thrust of the Englishman, struck his opponent so fairly upon the visor that the lances burst, the plumed helmet flew to pieces, and Sir Nigel galloped on down the lists with his bald head shimmering in the sunshine. 1,000 waving scarves and tossing caps announced that the first bout had fallen to the popular party. The Hampshire knight was not a man to be disheartened by a reverse. He spurred back to the pavilion, and was out in a few instants with another helmet. The second course was so equal that the keenest judges could not discern any vantage. Each struck fire from the other's shield, and each endured the jarring shock as though welded to the horse beneath him. In the final bout, however, Sir Nigel struck his opponent with so true an aim that the point of the lance caught between the bars of his visor and tore the front of his helmet out, while the German, aiming somewhat low and half stunned by the shock, had the misfortune to strike his adversary upon the thigh, a breach of the rules of the tilting yard, by which he not only sacrificed his chances of success, but would also have forfeited his horse and his armor had the English knight chosen to claim them. A roar of applause from the English soldiers, with an ominous silence from the vast crowd who pressed round the barriers, announced that the balance of victory lay with the holders. Already the 10 champions had assembled in front of the prince to receive the award,
when a harsh bugle call from the other end of the lists drew all eyes to a new and unexpected arrival. CHAPTER 24 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 24. How a champion came forth from the East. The Bordeaux lists were, as has already been explained, situated upon the plain near the river upon those great occasions when the tilting ground in front of the Abbey of St. Andrew's was deemed to be too small to contain the crowd. On the eastern side of this plain the countryside sloped upwards, thick with vines in summer, but now ridged with the bare brown enclosures. Over the gently rising plain curved the white road which leads inland, usually flecked with travellers, but now with scarce a living form upon it, so completely had the lists drained all the district of its inhabitants. Strange it was to see such a vast concourse of people, and then to look upon that broad, white, empty highway which wound away, bleak and deserted, until it narrowed itself to a bare streak against the distant uplands. Shortly after the contest had begun, any one looking from the lists along this road might have remarked, far away in the extreme distance, two brilliant and sparkling points which glittered and twinkled in the bright shimmer of the winter sun. Within an hour these had become clearer and nearer, until they might be seen to come from the reflection from the headpieces of two horsemen who were riding at the top of their speed in the direction of Bordeaux. Another half hour had brought them so close that every point of their bearing and equipment could be discerned. The first was a knight in full armour, mounted upon a brown horse with a white blaze upon breast and forehead. He was a short man, of great breadth of shoulder, with visor closed, and no blazonry upon his simple white surcoat or plain black shield. The other, who was evidently his squire and attendant, was unarmed save for the helmet upon his head, but bore in his right hand a very long and heavy oaken spear which belonged to his master. In his left hand the squire held not only the reins of his own horse, but those of a great black war horse, fully harnessed, which trotted along at his side. Thus the three horses and their two riders rode swiftly to the lists, and it was the blare of the trumpets sounded by the squire as his lord rode into the arena which had broken in upon the prize giving and drawn away the attention and interest of the spectators. "Ha, John!" cried the prince, craning his neck. "Who is this cavalier, and what is it that he desires?" "On my word, sire," replied Chandos with the utmost surprise upon his face, "it is my opinion that he is a Frenchman." "A Frenchman?" repeated Don Pedro. "And how can you tell that, my Lord Chandos, when he has neither coat armor, crest, or blazonry?" "By his armor, sire, which is rounder at elbow and at shoulder than any of Bordeaux or of England. Italian he might be, were his bassinet more sloped, but I will swear that those plates were welded betwixt this and Rhine. Here comes his squire, however, and we shall hear what strange fortune hath brought him over the marches." As he spoke, the attendant cantered up the grassy enclosure, and pulling up his steed in front of the royal stand, blew a second fanfare upon his bugle. He was a raw boned, swarthy cheeked man, with a black bristling beard and a swaggering bearing. Having sounded his call, he thrust the bugle into his belt, and pushing his way betwixt the groups of English and of Gascon knights, he reined up within a spear's length of the royal party. "I come," he shouted in a hoarse, thick voice with a strong Breton accent, "as squire and herald from my master, who is a very valiant pursuivant of arms, and a liegeman to the great and powerful monarch, Charles, King of the French. My master has heard that there is jousting here and prospect of honourable advancement, so he has come to ask that some English cavalier will vouchsafe, for the love of his lady, to run a course with sharpened lances with him, or to meet him with sword, mace, battle axe, or dagger. He bade me say, however,
that he would fight only with a true Englishman, and not with any mongrel who is neither English nor French, but speaks with the tongue of the one and fights under the banner of the other." "Sir!" cried de Clisson with a voice of thunder, while his countrymen clapped their hands to their swords. The squire, however, took no notice of their angry faces, but continued with his master's message. "He is ready now, sire," he said, "albeit his destrier has travelled many miles this day, and fast, for we were in fear lest we came too late for the jousting."
"Ye have indeed come too late," said the prince, "seeing that the prize is about to be awarded. Yet I doubt not that one of these gentlemen will run a course for the sake of honor with this cavalier of France."
"And as to the prize, sire," quoth Sir Nigel, "I am sure that I speak for all when I say this French knight hath our leave to bear it away with him, if he can fairly win it."
"Bear word of this to your master," said the prince, "and ask him which of these 5 Englishmen he would desire to meet. But stay, your master bears no coat armor, and we have not yet heard his name."
"My master, sire, is under vow to the Virgin neither to reveal his name nor to open his visor until he is back upon French ground once more."
"Yet what assurance have we," said the prince, "that this is not some varlet masquerading in his master's harness, or some caitiff knight the very touch of whose lance might bring infamy upon an honourable gentleman?"
"It is not so, sire," cried the squire earnestly. "There is no man upon earth who would demean himself by breaking a lance with my master."
"You speak out boldly, squire," the prince answered; "but unless I have some further assurance of your master's noble birth and gentle name, I cannot match the choicest lances of my court against him."
"You refuse, sire?"
"I do refuse."
"Then, sire, I was bidden to ask you from my master whether you would consent if Sir John Chandos, upon hearing my master's name, should assure you that he was indeed a man with whom you might yourself cross swords without indignity."
"I ask no better," said the prince.
"Then I must ask Lord Chandos that you will step forth. I have your pledge that the name shall remain ever a secret, and that you will neither say nor write one word which might betray it. The name is—" He stooped down from his horse and whispered something into the old knight's ear which made him start with surprise and stare with much curiosity at the distant knight who was sitting his charger at the further end of the arena. "Is this indeed sooth?" he exclaimed. "It is, my lord, and I swear it by St. Ives of Brittany."
"I might have known it," said Chandos, twisting his moustache and still looking thoughtfully at the cavalier. "What then, Sir John?" asked the prince. "Sire, this is a knight whom it is indeed great honor to meet, and I would that your grace would grant me leave to send my squire for my harness, for I would dearly love to run a course with him. Nay, nay, Sir John, you have gained as much honor as one man can bear, and it were hard if you could not rest now. But I pray you, squire, to tell your master that he is very welcome to our court, and that wines and spices will be served him, if he would refresh himself before jousting."
"My master will not drink," said the squire.
"Let him then name the gentleman with whom he would break a spear."
"He would contend with these 5 knights, each to choose such weapons as suit him best."
"I perceive," said the prince, "that your master is a man of great heart and high of enterprise. But the sun is already low in the west, and there will scarce be light for these courses. I pray you, gentlemen, to take your places, that we may see whether this stranger's deeds are as bold as his words."
The unknown knight had sat like a statue of steel, looking neither to the right nor to the left during these preliminaries. He had changed from the horse upon which he had ridden, and bestrode the black charger which his squire had led beside him. His immense breadth, his stern, composed appearance, and the mode in which he handled his shield and his lance were enough in themselves to convince the thousands of critical spectators that he was a dangerous opponent. Aylward, who stood in the front row of the archers, with Simon, Big John, and others of the company, had been criticising the proceedings from the commencement with the ease and freedom of a man who had spent his life under arms, and had learned in a hard school to know at a glance the points of a horse and his rider. He stared now at the stranger with a wrinkled brow and the air of a man who is striving to stir his memory.
"By my hilt, I have seen the thick body of him before to day, yet I cannot call to mind where it could have been. Nogent belike, or
Was it at Auray? Mark me, lads, this man will prove to be one of the best lancers of France, and there are no better in the world." "It is but child's play, this poking game," said John. "I would fain try my hand at it, for by the black rood, I think that it might be amended."
"What then would you do, John?" asked several.
"There are many things which might be done," said the forester thoughtfully. "Methinks that I would begin by breaking my spear."
"So they all strive to do."
"Nay, but not upon another man's shield. I would break it over my own knee."
"And what the better for that, old beef and bones?" asked Black Simon.
"So I would turn what is but a lady's bodkin of a weapon into a very handsome club."
"And then, John?"
"Then I would take the other's spear into my arm or my leg, or where it pleased him best to put it, and I would dash out his brains with my club." "By my 10 finger bones, old John," said Aylward, "I would give my feather bed to see you at a spear running. This is a most courtly and gentle sport which you have devised." "So it seems to me," said John seriously. "Or again, one might seize the other round the middle, pluck him off his horse, and bear him to the pavilion, and there to hold him to ransom."
"Good!" cried Simon, amid a roar of laughter from all the archers round. "By Thomas of Kent, we shall make a camp marshal of thee, and thou shalt draw up rules for our jousting. But, John, who is it that you would uphold in this knightly and pleasing fashion?"
"What mean you?"
"Why, John, so strong and strange a tilter must fight for the brightness of his lady's eye or the curve of her eyelash, even as Sir Nigel does for the Lady Loring."
"I know not about that," said the big archer, scratching his head in perplexity. "Since Mary hath played me false, I can scarce fight for her."
"Yet any woman will serve."
"There is my mother, then," said John. "She was at much pains at my upbringing, and by my soul I will uphold the curve of her eyelashes, for it tickleth my very heart root to think of her. But who is here?" "It is Sir William Beauchamp. He is a valiant man, but I fear that he is scarce firm enough upon the saddle to bear the thrust of such a tilter as this stranger promises to be."
Aylward's words were speedily justified, for even as he spoke the two knights met in the centre of the lists. Beauchamp struck his opponent a shrewd blow upon the helmet, but was met with so frightful a thrust that he whirled out of the saddle and rolled over and over upon the ground. Sir Thomas Percy met with little better success, for his shield was split, his vambrace torn, and he himself wounded slightly in the side. Lord Audley and the unknown knight struck each other fairly upon the helmet, but while the stranger sat as firm and as rigid as ever upon his charger, the Englishman was bent back to his horse's cropper by the weight of the blow, and had galloped half way down the lists ere he could recover himself. Sir Thomas Wake was beaten to the ground with a battle axe, that being the weapon which he had selected, and had to be carried to his pavilion. These rapid successes, gained one after the other over four celebrated warriors, worked the crowd up to a pitch of wonder and admiration. Thunders of applause from the English soldiers as well as from the citizens and peasants showed how far the love of brave and knightly deeds could rise above the rivalries of race. "By my soul, John," cried the prince, with his cheek flushed and his eyes shining, "this is a man of good courage and great hardiness. I could not have thought that there were any single arm upon earth which could have overthrown these four champions."
"He is indeed, as I have said, sire, a knight from whom much honor is to be gained. But the lower edge of the sun is wet, and it will be beneath the sea ere long."
"Here is Sir Nigel Loring on foot and with his sword," said the prince. "I have heard that he is a fine swordsman."
"The finest in your army, sire," Chandos answered. "Yet I doubt not that he will need all his skill this day."
As he spoke, the two combatants advanced from either end in full armor with their two-handed swords sloping over their shoulders. The stranger walked heavily and with a measured stride, while the English knight advanced as briskly as though there were no iron shell to weigh down the freedom of his limbs. At 4 paces distance they stopped, eyed each other for a moment, and then in an instant fell to work with a clatter and clang as though two sturdy smiths were busy upon their anvils. Up and down went the long shining blades, Round and round they circled in curves of glimmering light, crossing and meeting, disengaging, with a flash of sparks at every parry. Here and there bounded Sir Nigel, his head erect, his jaunty plume fluttering in the air, while his dark opponent sent in crushing blow upon blow, following fiercely up with cut and with thrust, but never once getting past the practised blade of the skilled swordsman. The crowd roared with delight as Sir Nigel would stoop his head to avoid a blow, or by some slight movement of his body allow some terrible thrust to glance harmlessly past him. Suddenly, however, his time came. The Frenchman, whirling up his sword, showed for an instant a chink betwixt his shoulder piece and the rerebrace which guarded his upper arm. In dashed Sir Nigel, and out again so swiftly that the eye could not follow the quick play of his blade, but a trickle of blood from the stranger's shoulder and a rapidly widening red smudge upon his white surcoat showed where the thrust had taken effect. The wound was, however, but a slight one, and the Frenchman was about to renew his onset when, at a sign from the prince, Chandos threw down his baton, and the marshals of the lists struck up the weapons and brought the contest to an end. "It were time to check it," said the prince, smiling, "for Sir Nigel is too good a man for me to lose, and by the five holy wounds, if one of those cuts came home I should have fears for our champion. What think you, Pedro?" "I think, Edward, that the little man was very able to take care of himself. For my part, I should wish to see so well matched a pair fight on while a drop of blood remained in their veins. We must have speech with him. Such a man must not go from my court without rest or sup. Bring him hither, Chandos, and certes, if the Lord Loring hath resigned his claim upon this goblet, it is right and proper that this cavalier should carry it to France with him as a sign of the prowess he has shown this day." As he spoke, the knight errant, who had remounted his war horse, galloped forward to the royal stand, with a silken kerchief bound round his wounded arm. The setting sun cast a ruddy glare upon his burnished arms, and sent his long black shadow streaming behind him up the level clearing. Pulling up his steed, he slightly inclined his head, and sat in the stern and composed fashion with which he had borne himself throughout, heedless of the applauding shouts and the flutter of kerchiefs from the long lines of brave men and of fair women who were looking down upon him. "Sir knight," said the prince, "we have all marvelled this day at this great skill and valor with which God has been pleased to endow you. I would fain that you should tarry at our court, for a time at least, until your hurt is healed and your horses rested." "My hurt is nothing, sire, nor are my horses weary," returned the stranger in a deep stern voice. "Will you not at least hie back to Bordeaux with us, that you may drain a cup of muscadine and sup at our table?" "I will neither drink your wine nor sit at your table," returned the other. "I bear no love for you or your race, and there is naught that I wish at your hands until the day when I see the last sail which bears you back to your island vanishing away against the western sky." "These are bitter words, Sir Knight," said Prince Edward with an angry frown. "And they come from a bitter heart," answered the unknown knight. "How long is it since there has been peace in my hapless country? Where are the steadings and orchards and vineyards which made France fair? Where are the cities which made her great? From Providence to Burgundy we are beset by every prowling hireling in Christendom, who rend and tear the country which you have left too weak to guard her own marches. Is it not a byword that a man may ride all day in this unhappy land without seeing thatch upon roof or hearing the crow of cock? Does not one fair kingdom content you, that you should strive so for this other one which has no love for you? Pardieu, a true Frenchman's words may well be bitter, for bitter is his lot and bitter his thoughts as he rides through his thrice unhappy country." "Sir knight," said the prince, "you speak like a brave man, and our cousin of France is happy in having a cavalier who is so fit to uphold his cause either with tongue or with sword. But if you think such evil of us, how comes it that you have trusted yourselves to us without warranty or safe conduct?" "Because I knew that you would be here, sire. Had the man who sits upon your right been ruler of this land, I had indeed thought twice before I looked to him for aught that was knightly or generous." With a soldierly salute he wheeled round his horse, and galloping down the lists disappeared amid the dense crowd of footmen and of horsemen who were streaming away from the scene of the tournament.
"The insolent villain!"
cried Pedro, glaring furiously after him.
I have seen a man's tongue torn from his jaws for less. Would it not be well, even now, Edward, to send horsemen to hale him back? Bethink you that it may be one of the royal house of France, or at least some knight whose loss would be a heavy blow to his master. Sir William Felton, you are well mounted. Gallop after the caitiff, I pray you." "Do so, Sir William," said the prince, "and give him this purse of 100 nobles, as a sign of the respect which I bear for him. For, by St. George, he has served his master this day, even as I would wish liegemen of mine to serve me." So saying, the prince turned his back upon the King of Spain, and springing upon his horse, rode slowly homewards to the Abbey of St. Andrew's. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 25. How Sir Nigel wrote to Twynham Castle. On the morning after the jousting, when Alleyn Edricson went, as was his custom, into his master's chamber to wait upon him in his dressing and to curl his hair, he found him already up and very busily at work. He sat at a table by the window, a deer hound on one side of him and a lurcher on the other, his feet tucked away under the trestle on which he sat, and his tongue in his cheek, with the air of a man who is much perplexed. A sheet of vellum lay upon the board in front of him, and he held a pen in his hand with which he had been scribbling in a rude schoolboy hand. So many were the blots, however, and so numerous the scratches and erasures, that he had at last given it up in despair, and sat with his single uncovered eye cocked upwards at the ceiling, as one who waits upon inspiration. "By St. Paul!" he cried, as Alleyne entered, "you are the man who will stand by me in this matter. I have been in sore need of you, Alleyne." "God be with you, my fair lord," the squire answered. "I trust that you have taken no hurt from all that you have gone through yesterday." "Nay, I feel the fresher for it, Alleyne. It has eased my joints, which were somewhat stiff from these years of peace. I trust, Alleyne, that thou didst very carefully note and mark the bearing and carriage of this knight of France, for it is time, now when you are young, that you should see all that is best and mould your own actions in accordance. This was a man from whom much honor might be gained, and I have seldom met any one for whom I have conceived so much love and esteem. Could I but learn his name, I should send you to him with my cartel, that we might have further occasion to watch his goodly feats of arms. It is said, my fair lord, that none know his name save only the Lord Chandos, and that he is under vow not to speak it. So ran the gossip at the squire's table. Be he who he might, he was a very hardy gentleman. But I have a task here, Alleyne, which is harder to me than aught that was set before me yesterday." "Can I help you, my lord?" "That indeed you can. I have been writing my greetings to my sweet wife, for I hear that a messenger goes from the prince to Southampton within the week, and he would gladly take a packet for me. I pray you, Alleyne, to cast your eyes upon what I have written, and see if they are such words as my lady will understand. My fingers, as you can see, are more used to iron and leather than to the drawing of strokes and turning of letters." "What then? Is there aught amiss that you should stare so?" "It is this first word, my lord. In what tongue were you pleased to write?" "In English, for my lady talks it more than she doth French." "Yet this is no English word, my sweet lord. Here are 4 T's, and never a letter betwixt them." "By St. Paul! it seemed strange to my eye when I wrote it," said Sir Nigel. "They bristle up together like a clump of lances. We must break their ranks and set them further apart. The word is that. Now I will read it to you, Alleyne, and you shall write it out fair, for we leave Bordeaux this day, and it would be great joy to me to think that the Lady Loring had word from me." Alleyne sat down as ordered, with a pen in his hand and a fresh sheet of parchment before him, while Sir Nigel slowly spelled out his letter,
running his forefinger on from word to word. "That my heart is with thee, my dear sweeting, is what thine own heart will assure thee of. All is well with us here, save that Pepin hath the mange on his back, and Pommers hath scarce yet got clear of his stiffness from being 4 days on shipboard, and the more so because the sea was very high, and we were like to founder on account of a hole in her side, which was made by a stone cast at us by certain sea rovers, whom may the saints have in their keeping, for they have gone from amongst us, as has young Terlake, and 2 mariners and archers, who would be the more welcome here, as there is like to be a very fine war, with much honor and all hopes of advancement, for which I go to gather my company together, who are now at Montaubon, where they pillage and destroy. Yet I hope that, by God's help, I may be able to show that I am their master, even as, my sweet lady, I am thy servant."
"How of that, Alleyne?" continued Sir Nigel, blinking at his squire with an expression of some pride upon his face. "Have I not told her all that hath befallen us?"
"You have said much, my fair lord, and yet, if I may say so, it is somewhat crowded together, so that my Lady Loring can, mayhap, scarce follow it. Were it in shorter periods—"
"Nay, it boots me not how you marshal them, as long as they are all there at the muster. Let my lady have the words, and she will place them in such order as pleases her best."
"But I would have you add what it would please her to know."
"That will I," said Alleyne blithely, and bent to the task.
"My fair lady and mistress," he wrote, "God hath us in his keeping, and my lord is well and in good cheer. He hath won much honor at the jousting before the prince, when he alone was able to make it good against a very valiant man from France. Touching the moneys, there is enough and to spare until we reach Montaubon. Herewith, my fair lady, I send my humble regards, entreating you that you will give the same to your daughter, the Lady Maude. May the holy saints have you both in their keeping, is ever the prayer of thy servant, Alleyn Edricson."
"That is very fairly set forth," said Sir Nigel, nodding his bald head as each sentence was read to him.
"And for thyself, Alleyne, if there be any dear friend to whom you would fain give greeting, I can send it for thee within this packet."
"There is none," said Alleyne sadly.
"Have you no kinsfolk then?"
"None, save my brother. I had forgotten that there was ill blood betwixt you."
"But there are none in all England who love thee?"
"None that I dare say so."
"And none whom you love?"
"Nay, I will not say that," said Alleyne. Sir Nigel shook his head and laughed softly to himself. "I see how it is with you," he said. "Have I not noticed your frequent sighs and vacant eye? Is she fair?"
"She is indeed," cried Alleyne, from his heart all tingling at this sudden turn of the talk. "And good?"
"As an angel."
"And yet she loves you not?" "Nay, I cannot say that she loves another." "Then you have hopes?"
"I could not live else."
"Then you must strive to be worthy of her love. Be brave and pure, fearless to the strong, and humble to the weak, and so, whether this love prosper or no, you will have fitted yourself to be honored by a maiden's love, which is, in sooth, the highest guerdon which a true knight can hope for." "Indeed, my lord, I do so strive," said Alleyne. "But she is so sweet, so dainty, and of so noble a spirit, that I fear me that I shall never be worthy of her."
"By thinking so you become worthy."
"Is she then of noble birth?"
"She is, my lord," faltered Alleyne.
"Of a knightly house?"
"Yes."
"Have a care, Alleyne, have a care," said Sir Nigel kindly. "The higher the steed, the greater the fall. Hawk not at that which may be beyond thy flight." "My lord, I know little of the ways and usages of the world," cried Alleyne, "but I would fain ask your rede upon the matter. You have known my father and my kin. Is not my family one of good standing and repute?"
"Beyond all question."
"And yet you warn me that I must not place my love too high." "Were Minstead yours, Alleyne, then, by St. Paul! I cannot think that any family in the land would not be proud to take you among them, seeing that you come of so old a strain. But while the Socman lives Ah, by my soul! If this is not Sir Oliver's step I am the more mistaken." As he spoke a heavy footfall was heard without, and the portly knight flung open the door and strode into the room.
"Why, my little coz," said he, "I have come across to tell you that I live above the barber's in the Rue de la Tour, and that there is a venison pasty in the oven, and 2 flasks of the right vintage on the table. By St. James, a blind man might find the place, for one has but to get in the wind from it and follow the savory smell. Put on your cloak then and come, for Sir Walter Hewett and Sir Robert Briquet, with 1 or 2 others, are awaiting us."
"Nay, Oliver, I cannot be with you, for I must to Montaubon this day."
"To Montaubon? But I have heard that your company is to come with my 40 Winchester rascals to Dax."
"If you will take charge of them, Oliver, for I will go to Montaubon with none save my 2 squires and 2 archers. Then, when I have found the rest of my company, I shall lead them to Dax. We set forth this morning."
"Then I must back to my pasty," said Sir Oliver. "You will find us at Dax, I doubt not, unless the prince throw me into prison, for he is very wroth against me."
"And why, Oliver?"
"Pardieu! Because I have sent my cartel, gauntlet, and defiance to Sir John Chandos and Sir William Felton."
"To Chandos? In God's name, Oliver, why have you done this?"
"Because he and the other have used me despitefully."
"And how?"
"Because they have passed me over in choosing those who should joust for England. Yourself and Audley I could pass, coz, for you are mature men. But who are Wake and Percy and Beauchamp? By my soul, I was prodding for my food into a camp kettle when they were howling for their pap. Is a man of my weight and substance to be thrown aside for the first 3 half grown lads who have learned the trick of the tilt yard? But hark ye, coz, I think of sending my cartel also to the prince."
"Oliver! Oliver, you are mad."
"Not I, i' faith. I care not a denier whether he be prince or no. By St. James, I see that your squire's eyes are starting from his head like a trussed crab. Well, friend, we are all 3 men of Hampshire, and not lightly to be jeered at."
"Has he jeered at you, then?"
"Pardieu, yes. 'Old Sir Oliver's heart is still stout,' said one of his court. 'Else it had been out of keeping with the rest of him,' quoth the prince. 'And his arm is strong,' said another. 'So is the backbone of his horse,' quoth the prince. 'This very day I will send him my cartel and defiance.'"
"Nay, nay, my dear Oliver," said Sir Nigel, laying his hand upon his angry friend's arm. "There is naught in this, for it was but saying that you were a strong and robust man, who had need of a good destrier. And as to Chandos and Felton, bethink you that if when you yourself were young, and the older lances had ever been preferred, how would you then have had the chance to earn the good name and fame which you now bear? You do not ride as light as you did, Oliver, and I ride lighter by the weight of my hair, but it would be an ill thing if in the evening of our lives we showed that our hearts were less true and loyal than of old. If such a knight as Sir Oliver Buttesthorn may turn against his own prince for the sake of a light word, then where are we to look for steadfast faith and constancy?"
"Ah, my dear little coz, it is easy to sit in the sunshine and preach to the man in the shadow. Yet you could ever win me over to your side with that soft voice of yours. Let us think no more of it, then."
"But, Holy Mother, I had forgot the pasty, and it will be as scorched as Judas Iscariot. Come, Nigel, lest the foul fiend get the better of me again."
"For 1 hour, then,
for we march at midday. Tell Aylward, Alleyne, that he is to come with me to Montaubon, and to choose 1 archer for his comrade. The rest will to Dax when the prince starts, which will be before the feast of the Epiphany. Have Pommers ready at midday with my sycamore lance, and place my harness on the sumpter mule." With these brief directions the 2 old soldiers strode off together, while Alleyne hastened to get all in order for their journey. Chapter 25.